Welcome to The Blue Dot, Northern Kentucky's premier political podcast, brought to you by the Kenton County Democratic Executive Committee. Welcome back to the Blue Dot podcast. This month, we're honoring the incredible men and women who have worn the uniform in military service to our country, as well as the families who stand beside them. Their courage and sacrifice protect the freedoms we cherish every day. And we're dedicating this month to their stories, their challenges, and their voices. I'm Natalie MacDonald.
And I'm Brian Koehl. Today, we are honored to welcome George Wright, a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, former Pentagon spokesman, and a true advocate for veterans. George now leads the Kentucky Democratic Party Veterans Council and serves on the board of the Kentucky Department of Veterans Affairs. His experience and dedication to service makes this conversation one you won't want to miss.
Yeah, I can't wait to speak with him about his service and all the work he's been doing on behalf of veterans and beyond. It's going to be great. We'll also have the opportunity to discuss the real-world impact of the Trump administration on veterans and military families, as well as the erosion of national security norms and how veterans across the country are responding to the government shutdown.
Yeah, but before we get to that, I'm so excited to shine a light on the military this month as we approach Veterans Day. It is important to us to take time to recognize the courage and dedication of those who served in the U.S. Armed Forces and salute them for their sacrifices they and their families made to protect our freedoms.
Yes, and veterans are an integral part of every community. So I wanted to share a few fun facts. You know, I love my fun facts, Brian.
Fun facts.
Fun facts about the military presence here in Kentucky. So the first one is, I think most know this, but Kentucky is home to two major Army installations, Fort Knox in Hardin County and Fort Campbell, which is on the Kentucky-Tennessee border. A little bit of it's in Tennessee, a little bit's in Kentucky. But because of these two facilities, Kentucky has the fourth largest concentration of active duty Army personnel in the country. That's behind Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina. Wow. But it isn't home to just the Army. Kentucky has over 31,000 active duty members across all branches of the military.
And when you include civilians, reservists, and National Guard members, Kentucky has about 56,000 military-related personnel receiving DoD paychecks, and it ranks 11th among U.S. states for active duty troops, largely due to Fort Knox and Fort Campbell. All of this also has a big impact on local economies, as Kentucky also ranks 11th in Department of Defense contract spending, receiving $10.6 billion annually, which supports military operations and healthcare services like TRICARE, which is the healthcare program for members of the U.S. military community managed by the Department of Defense.
Yeah, and that's just an enormous impact, which I didn't realize until, we started the research. These podcasts. It's crazy.
Yeah, $10.6 billion annually. That's huge.
It is. Absolutely. And, these men and women have sacrificed for our country, and they deserve all of the respect and resources and support that we can offer. But under the current administration and the previous Trump administration, it seems like the draft dodger in chief has offered personnel cuts, broken promises, and a lot of political theater, unfortunately.
Yes, that's right. And let's break it down. Trump's administration proposed deep cuts to the VA workforce, 17% in one budget cycle. That's over 80,000 positions, which is causing significant concern among veterans groups about the impact on services and access to care.
Yeah, that means fewer doctors, longer wait times, and reduced mental health services and critical suicide prevention programs. And in rural Kentucky, where access is already limited, this really hits hard.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if people are aware, but the Veterans Health Administration serves over 9 million veterans annually in 1,380 VA healthcare facilities, making it the largest healthcare system in America. And yet, this year, DOJ directed the VA to cancel over 800 contracts that support everything from chemotherapy treatment to records digitization.
Yeah, and aside from all the DOJ cuts and the VA workforce cuts, veterans make up 30% of the federal workforce. So as the federal workers' jobs are being eliminated, and those that do have jobs are now missing paychecks during this Trump shutdown, it's easy to see how disproportionately this hurts those that have served the country.
Yeah, all that is really concerning. And then there's Pete Hegseth, Trump's handpicked Secretary of Defense/War, and his disastrous meeting he had where he pulled together the nation's finest military leaders to yell at them about being too fat and too diverse.
I mean, can you imagine? There were
No, I
over
can't imagine.
there were over 800 generals and admirals in that audience, who had to listen to him make a fool out of himself. But I do want to give credit where credit is due. Pete Hegseth did serve in the Army National Guard. He held the rank of major and completed deployments to Guantanamo Bay, Iraq, and Afghanistan, earning 2 Bronze Stars and a combat infantryman badge. And so that is to be respected.
That's correct. That is to be respected. I don't ever want to take that away from him. But we'll leave it there. But before becoming Secretary of Defense in 2025, Hegseth's primary civilian roles were as a Fox News host and leader of 2 small veterans advocacy groups. He had no prior experience managing large defense organizations or shaping complex national security strategy, a stark contrast to previous defense secretaries who typically had Pentagon leadership roles or congressional defense experience.
It does seem like a pretty light resume,
And it's a light.
With a noticeable lack of high-level experience for someone appointed to oversee a department with 2 million service members, 100,000 civilians, and an $850 billion budget. But what do I know?
Yeah, well, and again, just the military experience aside, the experience of someone who's run an organization of that size or even close to that size, again, that management capability is a skill that he also did not bring to the table. All in all, it really shows a lack of respect for the position that he holds, which Trump tends to display for every cabinet level position. But that lack of respect seems to be an ongoing theme with Trump. There we go. Not only through some of his policies, but from what he says about the military. Everything from the suckers and losers comment to John McCain not being a hero. It is almost like he is so incredibly jealous because he knows he will never get the same respect as those that have served.
Yeah, and then there were some other personal attacks that he launched on members of the military, aside from all of the stuff that he said about John McCain. One of my favorites was when he repeatedly threw Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster under the bus. And McMaster was his former national security advisor. And he famously said that he was a weak and totally ineffective loser, which I thought was just great.
Was he looking in the mirror when he said that? No.
Exactly.
And then he said one of the most well-respected Marine generals, former Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, was the world's most overrated general.
Can you I can't even imagine this. And this all from a man who's led our country into the 2 longest government shutdowns in history because he is such an impotent and ineffective leader. And while all of this is very disheartening to me, I think it's more important to have the perspective of someone who did serve the country in a military capacity.
Well, you're in luck today, Natalie. We have Lieutenant Colonel George Wright, who has been on the front lines, both in uniform and now in the fight for democratic values here at home. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Brian. And please call me George. All my friends call me that. So,
hey, George, thank you. Appreciate it.
Very kind.
All right. Thank you.
You have a very dynamic background. Can you just start off by telling us a little bit about you and where you're from and your military service so we can get to know you a little better?
Indeed. Happily. Well, my father was in the Army for 21 years. Both he and my mother grew up in a small town in West Georgia. He was drafted at the very end of the Cold War after serving in the occupation forces in West Germany. He returned to the United States, went on to join the ROTC program at the University of Georgia. Years later, I did the same thing. I graduated from UGA with a degree in journalism and public relations in 1976. I was commissioned as lieutenant in the armor branch, the Tank Corps. And I served 3 overseas tours, 2 in Germany with tank battalions, 1 in Belgium at the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe. A notable assignment there was a period of time when I served as the second in command of a tank battalion 15 miles from the Iron Curtain, about 40 miles from a Soviet motorized rifle regiment at the end of the Cold War. I served with the U.S. forces in Grenada in 1983 in that expedition. 5 years at Army Recruiting Command in our neck of the woods at Fort Knox, both at the headquarters and as a battalion commander for almost 2.5 years. And I retired from what I called my legacy service in 1998. And I lived in Louisville for a little over 8 years. I found out about what's called the Army Retiree Recall Program, whereby officers and senior non-commissioned officers are brought back on active duty to reinforce the Army during periods of stress. And you may recall in 2006, the Army was meeting each other, coming and going in and out of Afghanistan and Iraq. And the Army needed help in what's called the institutional Army, the major headquarters, ROTC programs, some recruiting jobs. And I talked to my wife about it, and she said, sure, do it. So I wrote an email to the Army and said, I'm interested in this. And 6 weeks later, I found myself at Fort Benning, Georgia, and I was there for refresher training for 2 weeks. And then I moved on to the Pentagon, where I served 3 years there as a public affairs officer. The first year was in the Army Operations Center, where I got, as we say, re-greened in the Army. And I worked there, and then I kept one eye on what was going on in Iraq and Afghanistan and the other eye on the news, because a lot of what happens whether it's in Washington or any other capital in the world, narratives and priorities are sometimes influenced by what is covered in the news media. So I did that. I moved on upstairs to the main floor at Army Media Relations. I was a team chief. After 3 years of service as a recall officer, I transitioned to the civil service, and I worked in the same department where I was assigned at Army Public Affairs. And then I went on to become selected as the deputy director for media relations. Hence, I was Army spokesman at the Pentagon, and I dealt with every major issue affecting the Army during that period. I retired from full-time work in 2017. My wife and I returned to Louisville, and in 2018, I got an intermittent part-time job still working with the Army as a media role player. I acted as a war correspondent in the framework of Army Corps and Division command post exercises, and I went to all the major military installations the Army has at Fort Bragg, Fort Hood. I've been to Korea twice, Germany once, and a number of other smaller installations. Most recently, Fort Carson, Colorado. I was there in May. So all in all, I've been involved with the Army for about 49 years. It's been a long time, and I've served our country under every president since Gerald Ford. And so I'm grateful for that. All those experiences that have been given to me.
Well, that's, what a career. And it really speaks to the opportunities that the armed forces and serving in the military can bring to a person. Just the diversity of things that you did and, places you traveled and obviously the people you met and the impact you had. What an opportunity. You don't get that, in most businesses or most aspects of life. Yeah. I think the role in the Pentagon, Natalie and I were talking about that. Of course, that sounds really interesting. And now you gave us a little background that you're a kind of front-facing spokesperson, speaking with media and in the official dialogue and the official communications of the military. And then you have what are journalists saying about that? What's out there? What's the media saying? What are people hearing? And maybe you're learning about things through the media that you didn't know about through the military, it sounds like. Can you give a little detail on that?
I've stayed in touch with a number of the reporters who were on the Pentagon beat, the Pentagon Press Corps. I consider most of them, not every single reporter, I didn't know every single one, but the reporters I had regular weekly contact with, I consider friends still. I was concerned, as have they been, about essentially the dismantling of the Pentagon Press Corps and the new rules that the Secretary of Defense has imposed on covering them. I have found during my time, both in the field Army and as a Army spokesman at the Pentagon, that the people who cover that beat are men and women of integrity, commitment, honesty, and dedication. And they covered the news there at the Pentagon with all the good intentions that you would expect. And so I was saddened with the new rules that the Pentagon imposed on these folks. And I was quite proud that they all said, no, we're not going to sign these loyalty agreements. We're not going to sign these agreements that require us to clear with you, the Pentagon leaders, what we're reporting on. That's just not how it works. In fact, even General Jack Keane, 4-star Army retired general, who's a military commentator on Fox News, said that that's not how journalism works, and that decision that the Pentagon made is really not in the best interest of our country. So I salute the general. I'm not a regular viewer of Fox News, but I was pleased that even he weighed in on this situation.
Yeah, Fox News and Newsmax both, pretty right-wing news organizations. They both said nope, packed up their stuff and left. I thought that's pretty profound, I thought.
Yes, indeed.
You've had over 40 years in the military. Just, I guess I have to ask, have you ever seen anything like this before? Have you ever seen an administration really just say, okay, well, we're not going to let you in. We're not going to let you cover us. We want an NDA for you to even be in our press corps. I'd love to hear your opinion on that, or your insight on that.
That has been, it's just unheard of in my years of service. Typically, senior officers will tell their public affairs staff, okay, what are they going to ask me? What's the topic? And now we all know the topic of the interview. They want to talk about readiness or the new tank system that's been introduced. We generally have a feeling as to how the interview is going to go, and we know their history and their tendencies and their backgrounds and some of the things that they typically focus on. But never, as a public affairs officer, have I been confronted with restrictions that were this tight. Now, One American News, which is now the content provider for the Voice of America, which in my days of service in the Cold War was really one of the great bright beacons of light and hope in the Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union. Based in Washington, of course, the Voice of America had a number of bureaus in Berlin and Rome and London, and they were reporters, albeit government civilians or civilians on contract, but they were ball and strike reporters. They report the news as it existed, and it was one of only a few ways that the citizens of the former Soviet Union and their satellites, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland, on and on, could get updated, reliable news. So it's really been sad to watch that OAN is now, this right-wing news network is providing content for a government agency to broadcast overseas. And I'm looking forward to a day when the restrictions that we spoke of will end, and also the Voice of America will be a bright light into the dark world that we sometimes live in.
Well, we're optimistic that we are going to see those changes, that things are going to come back. I mean, that's why we're doing this podcast.
Of course. This is important. I thank you.
Well, thank you. And I mean, if Natalie and I, we have to prop each other up every now and then, because sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. But if we didn't think there was going to be an end to this and we'd have an opportunity to actually learn from this and even improve and strengthen our democracy, we wouldn't be doing this. So let's, we're interested in, you're a board member of the Kentucky Department of Veteran Affairs. Could you speak, bringing us back to Kentucky a little bit? Could you speak a little bit about that organization and its impact on Kentuckians and its role in the national scene?
Of course. I'll do that. Let me first explain how all that came about.
Sure.
I still am a news junkie. My wife will say, George, turn off your phone, turn off the TV.
I hear that a lot.
I was going to say, Brian,
exactly.
I think you guys have something in common there.
Yes.
Okay. So in 2018, when our president went to Helsinki to meet with the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, at the summit, of course, it was on the news and I was watching live, and I was appalled, shocked at the performance that he had in the joint press conference with his counterpart from the former Soviet Union, Russia. He was asked, among other things, can you comment on their involvement in the 2016 election? And he tap danced and denied and said, well, he told me that they weren't involved. And then the follow-up question was, Well, despite the fact that 16 national intelligence agencies say that they were, what do you have to say? He continued to deny that. And as you might imagine, my head was exploding and I had a few words for the president, and that my wife heard. And she said, "Stop yelling at the TV, George. Go out and get involved in something." So in the days ahead, I contacted the office of Congressman Yarmouth here. I live in Louisville and his district in 3rd Congressional District. And so I cut my teeth as a political activist, making yard signs and stuffing envelopes. One thing led to another. And there were a small group of us that believed that we were tired of the GOP chokehold on patriotism. And we were tired of hearing that Democrats hate America. Now, I was an independent during my years of service. I voted for candidates from both parties. When I was a civil servant, my wife and I donated a small amount of money to President Obama's campaign, but I maintained my independent affiliation. But after the Helsinki summit, I became a card-carrying Democrat. So we set about to lay out some principles, and we adopted the Army values of loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage, none of which did the president ever show any affinity for. He's all about himself. He's egotistical and selfish, and some would call him a narcissist. But again, we're tired of hearing that the Democrats hate America, and we're tired of their chokehold on patriotism. Now, what we do is we have a Facebook page, Kentucky Democratic Veterans Council, on which we post a number of items about things that are in the news, updates, announcements of rallies and marches and demonstrations, meet the candidates. Sometimes we will solicit for volunteers to help this or that candidate in their campaign. So I won't say we're real robust, but we do have a presence on social media, and we do the best we can. Now, as a result of that budding activism that I got involved in the late teens, including some door knocking for Andy Bashir, I was honored to be appointed as an at-large member of the governor's advisory board for the governor, and we oversee the work of the Kentucky Department of Veterans Affairs. As such, I go to there's a Zoom meeting every quarter where we discuss the issues of the day and some of the projects that the board is involved in. And I'm also very proud to attend the annual meeting of the Friends and Allies of the Kentucky Department of Veterans Affairs. And I'm also thrilled that it's such a robust program. My good friend, retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Whitney Allen, is the commissioner of the Department of Veterans Affairs. And he and his staff, when they have these regular meetings in August, will bring speakers from Washington, from the administration, whether it's the administration of Joe Biden or the administration of Donald Trump. Representatives from their Department of Veterans Affairs have always attended. Members of the leadership of the Louisville and Lexington VA medical centers come and speak with us and give us updates. We've got a big representation among the veterans service organizations, the Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Disabled American Veterans, and they all attend. And so these one-day seminars take place typically on a Thursday, and the next day, Commissioner Allen will hold workshops on training new people who will coach, guide, and mentor new veterans to help them file their VA disability claim. So it's an important 2 days of events and classes and training and discussion. And again, my hat goes off to Whitney Allen, who's the commissioner there, and the governor himself, who gives Commissioner Allen the leeway to serve Kentucky's veterans as he does. There's about 300,000 of us in the state, and I'm thrilled to be a part of that effort.
Yeah, it sounds like you're quite busy and doing a great service to the veterans in Kentucky and beyond. So that's amazing. And when you look at specifically in Kentucky, what are some of the needs other than what you had already spoken about, the outreach that you have done to our veterans? What do our veterans need in Kentucky? And if there's any way that us civilians can help at all?
Well, we are not a monolith. First of all, thank you for your willingness to be of service. We're not a one size fits all monolithic organization. Many of us are blessed to have good health into our old age, and some of us are not so fortunate. Some of us have been wounded in combat and we've lost limbs. Some of us have been affected mentally and psychologically by the effects of close-in combat, and even combat that's not close-in. The separation from our families and friends and our communities, the mortar and artillery fire that rained down on our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan has been a source of internal conflict for members of our community. And Commissioner Allen has a number of assets at his disposal, as does the Kentucky-based Department of Veterans Affairs medical facilities in both Louisville and Lexington. And there are some clinics throughout the state as well. So while we're not engaged in active, direct combat now, those issues that affect veterans are not as top of mind. But I do know that the psychological wounds and the physical wounds that we can't always see and the ones we can see are being attended to as best we can by members of our national and state organizations. So my hat goes off to the governor, the commissioner, and even the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington. I do know that there are some changes ahead. Elon Musk's Doge efforts were, shall we say, disruptive. And so I think our country is still feeling some of the effects of that. And we're going to get to where we need to be, if not in the months and few years ahead, certainly when the next president, hopefully a Democrat, will be inaugurated.
So what impacts have you seen at your level and in your services just since the Trump administration? I mean, was there have you seen things drop off, or are you just seeing things getting more complex? But as you said, I know we're going to be able to pick it up and fill in these gaps. We're just in this kind of change mode right now.
I'm lucky enough to get my medical care at the Louisville VA Medical Center, and I've had a handful of appointments this calendar year already, and I saw no impact, no effect, no negative effects from how things were a year ago. Now, I think the story is still to be fully told. There were some widespread, indiscriminate cuts of federal civil service employees that had an immediate impact. The director of OMB, a fellow named Mr. Vogt. One of the things
I'm familiar with that guy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, wish I'd never met him.
Yeah, he's a real character.
Yeah.
One of the things he is quoted as saying is that we want to traumatize federal workers. I mean, what is that all about? Why would anybody say something like that? But an employee of the Trump administration did just that. So that's the kind of people we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Now, if I could, I talked about veterans are not a monolithic group. Most veterans are like the three of us. And as the governor says, we talk about kitchen table issues. We wake up in the morning and say, okay, I got to go to my job. And how long is the job going to be mine, with the tariffs and the unrest and the uncertainty and taxes and the retaliation from our trading partners? What kind of roads or what kind of conditions will the roads and bridges that I use to go to my job, will they be in? What about hospital closings in Kentucky as a result of the big, beautiful bill and that's going to cut Medicaid. It's going to cut benefits for the poor. It's going to cut community hospitals in the state. So these are issues that affect Kentucky kitchen table at which many veterans sit, and they're worried about their families as well. So while I'm grateful that we're not actively involved in large-scale combat operations, we've got enough problems on our plate to go around and enough problems for all of us to work towards solving. And Donald Trump's not the right guy to do that.
Yeah. And you spoke earlier about his showing in Helsinki, and you spoke a little bit about how we could return kind of back to normal when we get a new president and we get through this. But what scares me is being on the outside as a civilian is, we watched January 6th unfold, and at that point in time, democracy seemed to be in peril. And during the first term, we had H.R. McMaster. We had some people in there who were really keeping things on the guardrails that I feel like aren't there any longer. But I still have faith in the military leaders who are there. Does it scare you like it scares us? Or do you have faith that this democracy is strong enough to get through it?
It is frightening, and I have to dig deep to find the faith. We're in a very dark period in our country's history. We have a Secretary of Defense it has been credibly reported, who has a drinking problem. It's been creditably reported that he has an issue with assaulting women sexually. And he has a record of financial mismanagement. Now, some skeptics would say, well, he'll fit in at the Pentagon. But the fact of the matter is that Senator John Tower back in the 90s was nominated to be Secretary of Defense, and that nomination didn't even get out of committee because of his reported drinking problem. But that was a different era. Now, the Republican
that was a long time ago.
Yes, it was. It's true. But here we've got a man who says, well, if you make me Secretary of Defense, I won't drink. And if you make me Secretary of Defense, I won't womanize. And it's just uncharted territory. It's baffling. We've got just last week a 3-star admiral, a fellow named Halsey, who was commander of Southern Command.
South American, like that region, right?
Right, exactly. Caribbean, South America, Central America. He had responsibility for military operations in those areas. And of course, with the extrajudicial killings, of which there have been about 15 since they began this summer, I think. And to his credit, Rand Paul has spoken out about it. But I wrote Senator Paul about my concerns about these extrajudicial killings, and I won't take credit for it, but he has spoken out about them. So I'll give him credit where credit is due. Rand Paul did not take my advice now and not vote for Hegseth. He did not vote. He did vote for Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard, who has questionable loyalty, but this is where we are today. So I'm concerned about where we are. I'm concerned about the possibility of loyalty oaths. I'm concerned about the number of generals that have already been fired. The first one was Admiral, Air Force 4-star General Brown, who drew the ire of President Trump in the first term in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder. So then as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, made a very stirring and poignant video about his time as a young man growing up in this country and the effect that racial tensions had on his life and how he overcame them. So for me, that was a moment that earned him a lot of respect already. As a 4-star general. They have a lot of respect.
Like we have the right guy in this position.
Exactly.
Look at the character of this guy.
So, and our whole country was tense. And so he had the character to speak out about that and his life and what happened to him as a young man. So he was fired within days, as was the Chief of Naval Operations, a female Navy admiral, 4 stars. He didn't like her. So those two were called woke, as if that's a bad thing, to be aware of one's world and to be sympathetic to others. I think that's quite fine, but they don't like that. So we're going to continue to see some problems. I was heartened, though, by a couple of things. When Hegseth and Trump went to Quantico, sorry for the clock.
That's all right.
I like how the cuckoo clock was going off when you said Trump and Hegseth.
Yes, exactly.
Timing. Way to go, Natalie. Way to plan that out.
It was almost like that was intentional.
Yes. So you'll recall, your viewers and listeners will recall that Hegseth convened every general officer in the armed forces to go to Quantico, which is a Marine Corps base about 30 miles south of Washington. I mean, that was a stupid thing to do. But I found it very telling. Hegseth was giving his rah-rah locker room pep talk to all these generals. And he was a major, and I salute his service. He has 2 Bronze Stars, and so I'm proud of that. He served in Guantanamo, as many National Guard officers did, and then he went to Afghanistan and served a tour of duty there, and that's wonderful. I'm proud of him. I salute him, but he seems to be more suited to be a first lieutenant than he does the Secretary of Defense. And he seems to take great joy and elation in that he's now the boss of all these general officers, and he had them all in a conference room. And he was giving them a pep talk. And at the end of his remarks, you can go to the videotape and watch it. He assumes this position almost as if he's inviting them to say, "Hooah," or "Hoorah," or "Bravo," or "Hip hip hooray, we can do it." And they all sat on their hands.
Stone face.
And so,
that was great.
And then the president came on, and of course, he loves the crowds. He loves to rile them up, but he was met with the same response. And so I'm proud of these men and women who exercised restraint.
You know, one of the things about the Quantico meeting and the stone-faced reception, I don't really know where, I'm not sure where I want to go with this, other than I've always heard about throughout history and read about military coups and thought, how terrible must that be? But honestly, I have to say, when I saw Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump and their reception and the seriousness and even maybe some skepticism, and maybe that's my own optimism, that there was skepticism amongst that crowd, the audience that was watching him, I felt like if we get to a point where somebody has to refuse an illegal order, or there is something that's, someone in the military they know they'll do the right thing. And I can't, here I am trying to judge what's the right thing and not the right thing to refuse the order of Secretary of Defense or President. But I think you're looking at 2 guys on stage who could do some really stupid stuff and some really short-sighted stuff. And you have guys in the military with 30, 40 years of experience and have been in battle and have done everything. Looking at these guys, I trust their judgment as to what we need to do versus the leaders of our, defense and our president. So I don't know exactly what I'm saying there. Like,
no, you're fine.
I felt good. I felt good. I felt like if push came to shove and we were at that moment, we would have guys in the military who would stand up and do the right thing based upon their experience and their love of this country, and also, global security.
Yes. There seems to be a fine line between that courageous moment where one goes public and says, I cannot abide by this. I refuse this, and therefore I'm going to resign or retire.
The nobility of a resignation is a weird thing.
Yeah. As opposed to, well, I really disagree with this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fight this from the inside. I'm going to slow roll this.
Yeah.
Some of us were old enough to remember an expression called what we call the Ho Chi Minh strategy, which is just to wait them out. You get a new Ho Chi Minh, of course, for your younger viewers and listeners, was a leader of North Vietnam. He was a revolutionary. He led the fight against the French and then the Americans. And so his philosophy was, well, we'll just fight a guerrilla war, and eventually the French and then eventually the Americans are going to leave. Who knows?
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about, I know we've had you for a long time and we appreciate your time, but one thing I did want to just bounce off of you is Trump, the National Guard, and other military personnel into American cities. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
I do.
Yes, I figured you did.
Now that we're getting to know you better, I think I was pretty sure you would have a thought on that.
Yes, indeed. Historically, the Army National Guard has 2 missions. One is 3. One is disaster relief, and that's probably how the Guard is most well known. After a tornado or a hurricane or fires or some natural disaster, the National Guard is there. The Kentucky National Guard, of course, is commanded by our governor. They also, and there's some gray areas here, may be called upon to reinforce local and state law enforcement agencies. We've seen that over the years in Los Angeles in the aftermath of the Watts riots in mid 1960s. We have seen that in 2020 in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder. And that can be a slippery slope. Typically, those mobilizations were, and I should also say we saw some of it in 1968 to 1970 in Washington, D.C., when the 82nd Airborne Division sent a couple of paratroopers, battalions of paratroopers to Washington, D.C. during the anti-Vietnam War riots. So it's not something that's never happened before, but they're so rare that only under the most serious conditions will a governor call the president and tell him that I am overwhelmed and my local and state law enforcement agencies are not capable of handling this problem. Please help. So that's typically what happens. It is unnatural and not routine for the president to say, well, I'm going to send 600 guardsmen and women to fill in the blank, Los Angeles, Chicago. Now they're in Memphis. I mean, what have we become? And there's an old saying, if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, then every problem is a nail. And that's what the president is looking at in Portland and Memphis. Now, are there crime problems there? Yes, there are. But again, if all you got is a hammer in your toolkit, then every problem is a nail. And so there's long been, probably for as long as I've been in the Army, discussion, debates, seminars, speeches about civil military relationships and how we can improve that. And I'll tell you, one way to not improve it is to send guardsmen and women in mass to American cities to conduct law enforcement operations. They're not trained for that. So I'm concerned about that. And just recently, Hegseth himself has created, under the direction of the president, kind of a rapid deployment force in the Guard. And we still have more to learn about that.
What's that all about? Right.
Will it be a rifle battalion? Will there be armored vehicles? Will they have tanks? Who knows? We don't, because the Pentagon Press Corps is not there in the building reporting on that, and it's something that Hegseth is not talking about. These are all great mysteries, and it's entirely possible, Brian and Natalie, that the president could deploy this time next year, round about election.
What he's doing.
Yep.
Let's cordon off certain areas of these blue cities that vote for Democrats. Let's make traffic impassable. Let's set up some checkpoints to slow things down a little bit so people can get to the voting booth.
Yeah, I think they're going to be rapidly deployed to polling places. I think that's what that rapid deployment's all about.
So we'll see what happens there. Rumsfeld used to say the Baghdad clock moves at a different pace than the Washington clock moves. So we'll see what happens around mid to late October next year with regard to National Guard deployments in blue cities. We'll see.
Yes. Yeah. Well, George, we really appreciate you joining us. It was a great conversation, and
I could literally talk to you all night. Yes.
Yeah, and really touching on so many things that we're interested in, our viewers and listeners, the people that we talk to in our groups are concerned about. And really, honestly, I think it kind of goes back to what you said about veterans are typical everyday people in most cases. I mean, some are disabled and some are suffering from PTSD and other things that happen to them through their military experience. And so just being able to kind of share these conversations with you coming from your perspective, but also as an everyday citizen like us, it's refreshing.
Those are important points. When I was a young officer in the Army, I would tell my subordinates that the soldiers who are coming in the Army, they come from hometown USA. They grew up playing Little League or They competed in their high school athletic departments, intramural sports, and they want to win. They want to do good. They want to excel. People like the recognition from doing good work. And that's what our soldiers want. And they enjoy the camaraderie of military service. And when they come back home, we have certain expectations that, okay, we're going to expect the infrastructure to be here, all just like everybody else.
Yep.
So we all got to work together. I'm not a thank me for my service kind of guy. Proud to have served. I'm grateful for it. But we're just everyday Americans, just like you, Brian, and you, Natalie. And we expect good things from our government. We expect things to work. We don't expect a crisis every day. We don't expect to get up in the morning and turn our phone on and say, well, what did he mess up overnight? We just want things to be okay.
Right. That's
there
right.
we go. And things are not okay today.
Yeah. And we are going to thank you for your service. Yes, exactly.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Brian.
As always, we like to close our podcast with a call to action. And today I invite you to connect locally. Reach out to groups like the Northern Kentucky Military Coalition, American Legion posts, and the DAB or the Disabled Veterans chapters that are in your area. Many veteran organizations rely on community support, so consider volunteering your time, attend events, or help spread the word about their programs. And also be sure to be an advocate for policy by staying informed and speaking up for legislation that supports veterans' healthcare, education, and benefits. Democracy thrives when we protect those who protected us. And finally, check in. Sometimes the simplest act matters the most. Call a veteran friend or neighbor. Let them know that they're valued and not forgotten. And Brian, how about you? Any calls to action on your radar?
Hey, Natalie, I love all the ways you've outlined to support our veterans. That's great. I've been looking at two main areas of activism. First, of course, is kind of like following on the No Kings with indivisible.org. As I mentioned in our last podcast, they're trying to expand their influence, take their 7 million plus that hit the streets and maybe the other 4 or 5 million who didn't do that but are sharing that sentiment and want to get involved. There's a huge amount of leverage there. And they've been talking about some potential boycotts, exerting economic power, shopping blackout days, et cetera. So there's more to come on that. I'm keeping an eye on it. I encourage our listeners to go to indivisible.org and also kind of stay abreast of the plans and activities. And then the 5051 5050 #1 movement is also planning a blackout the system week of zero consumer activity, which sounds really intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I can do it. Coming up at the end of the month, the idea is that, the way that we get to the billionaires is we just pull dollars out of their pockets or keep those dollars from flowing in. I just got an email from 5051 on this event. I'm looking forward to more details. But if you go to 5050, that's written out.one, or again, indivisible.org, you can sign up for their email newsletters, which keep you posting on this stuff. It's a really good way to stay in touch. And then my second focus is on food banks. Mm-hmm. With the SNAP benefits and the games that Trump and Republicans are trying to starve underprivileged and needy Americans as a political tool. I mean, that's just got me fired up and pissed off and really wanting to be involved with that because I think that is probably one of the most critical needs we have right now. So I've done a little research on how to help. And really what I've found out is, number one, Feeding America is the kind of the largest resource in the U.S. and they have all kinds of member food banks that they help out. And one of them is Free Store Food Bank in Cincinnati, right down there on Liberty. And you can look at their network. And what's great about doing that, you think, well, I want to help somebody local. And a lot of them do flow down to local, but they leverage that buying power nationally. So they are able to get the most bang for the buck. So that's a really good way. Or any local food bank. There are several of them around. The best ways to actually provide, kind of fill the need is, number one, volunteer your time. And most of them have sign-up sheets, so you can do that. The second is to provide monetary donations because, again, as I said, they can take those dollars and actually go through their existing supply chains and pool those funds and get the most bang for the buck. And they know exactly the types of foods that are the best to buy. They won't spoil. They're high in protein, et cetera. There are food drives and things like that. I don't want to dismiss those. Anybody who's involved in a food drive at their church or school or other organization, those are important, but also sometimes those foods aren't exactly the best foods to be used, and they're not purchased at the best possible price. So think about that. Volunteer your time. Throw some dollars at these places. Go to feedingamerica.org, I believe. You can just Google Feeding America, and that's a good place to start. So,
and I just want to let you know, I don't know
go
if you
ahead.
saw
Yes.
it. Just don't know if you're talking about it. Kentucky is
Okay.
having a statewide food drive. I don't know if you've seen that come
Okay.
out yet, but we're doing
I
it
haven't.
county by county. Kenton County, for example, is collecting some food, and we're doing a drive, and it's all going to be taking place next Friday throughout the
Great.
states. So check that out as well as getting it out like in your community, in your counties. That's
Yeah,
what we
that's
keep an eye
great.
on as
That's
well.
great.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think with that, we're at the end of our podcast, and thanks everyone for joining us. We had a lot that we went through today. I think it was a really good one. I appreciate everybody's time and viewership.
Yeah, and you can also join the conversation at our Facebook and Instagram pages or at blue.podcast.com. And of course, if you like listening to the podcast, please consider donating to help fund it, which you can do by clicking the donate link at blue.podcast.com. And until next time, make sure you stay curious, keep the facts in focus, and never stop fighting for what matters. And peace out, everybody.